Well, hate tuashte mi takiapi, Camie Goldhammer makiapi Damakota Sisituan Wapetuan Hamacha Seattle Edwati. Good afternoon, my relatives. My name is Camie Goldhammer. I am a licensed clinical social worker, IBCLC, and full spectrum indigenous doula. I am Dakota. My tribe is Sisseton Wahpeton from South Dakota. I live in the illegally occupied territories of the Duwamish people, also known as Seattle, Washington. So I am very happy to be here. I'm going to let my best friend Kim introduce herself, and then we'll get going.
Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Kimberly Moore Salas. Nakai Denen Deshlet Senajini Bashachin Ashinhedoche Yadene Twachini Dashanelet. I am Dene. I come from a small community from my mother's side in Tulani Lake, Arizona. I was born in Tuba City, which is a Navajo reservation out in Arizona. I currently moved to Northern California. Is a little town called Willow Creek. It's about 1,500 people near the Hoopa territory, which is the reservation up in Northern Cal, along with the Yurok and Karuk people. So they are the river people, coastal people, and the salmon people. I'm also a lactation consultant. I've done hospital work in Phoenix. A year ago, I left my job to do this work with Camie, among other projects. So I was there for 10 years as a lactation consultant, but I come from a peer counseling background from the WIC program. So yeah, thank you for having me.
Cool. Well, we're so excited to be here. I love Rose a lot, and I know some of you have seen me speak here in years past. 5 years ago, though, I presented on a new thing that Kim and I were starting, which was the Indigenous Breastfeeding Counselor Training, now the Indigenous Lactation Counselor Training. At that point, when I presented at Rose, we had done 2 trainings. We have now done 26 trainings, and so we thought this would be a great, I had, called Mama Bug, and I was like, hey, we're gonna come to Rose. If you want us to present or do anything, like, let us know. But we thought this would be a really good opportunity to kind of give a 5 years later, like, what's been going on, what have we been doing, what have we been up to, what have we accomplished, and most importantly, what have our IndiGLCs accomplished, which is really incredible to see what they've done with this work. So, because a lot of you, I don't want to assume you all know about Indigenous Lactation Counselors, so I'm going to do a brief introduction to it and kind of our foundation and our roots, and then we're going to talk a little bit about the training and then give you all that update. Oh, okay. I advance with this. Wait. It advanced on here, but not on the on these screens. I can tell it forwarded on this. Okay, it's okay. I'll just keep. So the first thing that we wanted to do while these ladies figure this out is both Kim and I introduced ourselves in our language. That's an important part of our introduction. Both of us are emerging speakers in our languages. We're working on learning our language, and so an introduction is one really important piece of that. The other thing that is traditional in most of our Indigenous communities, and whenever we have an Indigenous gathering, we always want to acknowledge the original caretakers and stewards of the land of which we're on. And so we want to take a moment and acknowledge the original stewards of this land, New Orleans. The sovereign nation of the Chitimacha have always been here. Their stories, their creation story begins here. So they say since the beginning of time they have been in the New Orleans area. The Chitimacha's land once encompassed the entire, oh, thank you. Atchafalaya Basin, lands westward towards Lafayette, Louisiana, southward to the Gulf of Mexico, and eastward to the New Orleans area. The Chitimacha tribe continues to exert a strong presence and currently maintains a 900-acre Indian reservation in St. Mary Parish. So as guests in their land, we want to honor them and express our gratitude for allowing us to be here today. All right. Okay, let's see. Andrea just put this in front of me and I was like, okay, got it. And it looks significantly different than him. I was like, I'm good, thanks. And then now that I look, there we go. Okay, we got it. I was like, wait, this looks completely different than the other one. All right, so one of the things that we want to discuss is the process of decolonization. A lot of times when we're talking about equity and diversification, specifically of the lactation field, a lot of times we're talking about just us being at the table, right? Like just being there, but not necessarily like decolonizing or completely dismantling that system, right? And kind of the way I always think about it is like traditionally Native people, we never sat at tables. So, you know, it's not a thing of like, I don't want to be at your table. We don't eat at tables anyway. We eat on the floor with our family, with our babies on our laps, all of us together, sharing meals. That's what decolonization looks like, not being at a table, you know, that someone else built and told us that's where we're supposed to eat and how we're supposed to eat, right? So when thinking about decolonizing the field of lactation, which is something that we are constantly working on too, that's the thing about decolonization is we've all been impacted by it, right? We've all been impacted by it, and we have to undo this too, right? I went to public school, I went to college, I got a master's degree. I have a lot to undo as well, right? So the definition of decolonization that we're going to be working from when we're talking about the Indigenous Lactation Counselor training is the concept of Indigenous lactation, which is a process that Indigenous people whose communities were grossly affected by colonial expansion, genocide, and cultural assimilation may go through by reframing with other Indigenous frameworks of thought and understanding the history of their colonization and rediscovering their ancestral traditions and cultural values while considering the future simultaneously. Okay, so I want to share a little bit about the thought process or the beginning of the IBC or ILC. We just changed the name to Indigenous Lactation Counselor, so I'm still getting used to that new name change. But a lot of this came from my own experience of becoming a lactation consultant. I became a lactation consultant almost 10 years ago. For many people who are IBCLCs, usually we work for a couple years leading up to that point, right? So I started my process in about 2011, had been working in the field of lactation or maternal child health, native maternal child health since around 2008, 2009. So I was already a couple years into the field at that point. But I was really coming up against a lot of barriers in the field of lactation because I wasn't an LC, right? And so no one really wanted to hear what I had to say because I was a social worker. I wasn't an LC. You know, you guys think it's bad now, like it was a lot different back then, right? Like it was a whole other ball game, you know, a decade ago. So my whole process of becoming an LC was really informed for me the need for a different type of training. I received excellent clinical education. I took a 45-hour course, as most of us do, right? That's pretty standard in the United States. Any lactation supporter in the US, we start with a 45-hour course, right? We all do that. But we don't really talk about who teaches those 45-hour courses and how they were developed, right? And the fact is that we have all learned, unless you've taken our course, or now the black course, right? Have all learned from the same 5 or 6 white women for the last 35 years. That is the foundation of every single one of our education, the same education across the board, taught by the same people, right? Even though they may have brought on other students or other teachers along the way, it's still their curriculum, okay? And so I definitely had that experience, you know, being a Native woman, wanting to take these trainings. I, again, loved my lactation, my 45-hour course. I did an additional 45 hours of conferences, online education, things like that. Every single one was taught by an elder white woman. My mentors were white women, right? And when I started thinking about, and again, this is not at all to disparage the clinical knowledge and the education that they gave me, and I'm always grateful and raise my hands to what I received from them. But bottom line is I should have received that from my grandma. I should have received it from my aunties. I should have received it from my mom, from my cousins, and from the women that had come before me, right? But instead that knowledge was taken away from me and my family as a result of colonization, right? And colonization's purpose is genocide, right? Is to wipe out a community. And the process of that for Native people was through murder for a long time, right? And we could argue that that's still happening, right? And then there was a policy change, which was assimilation. And that's when Native children were systematically removed from their mothers, who are the culture bearers, right? And so that's where we really lost that knowledge. Or as our friend Beth Moody says it, we didn't lose it, it just was put away, tucked away until we could bring it to life again, right? And so, you know, when I was thinking about my own experiences, I was like, okay, so I'm now a really good lactation consultant who's going to be really good at serving white people. Right? Like, that's essentially what I was trained to do, because that was all of my training, right? And so I had to go through my own decolonization process, right? Even though I had only grown up in a Native community, I had, lived in a Native family. I myself was Native, but I was not trained or did not receive the education that I needed to serve my community in that way. Okay, so that's kind of where I was like, well, here I was, like, literally paying white women to get this education back that I should have gotten, right? That was my birthright as an Indigenous person. And so that's where the need was, right? Where it kind of came from. It was my own thing of like, I want something more, so other people probably want something more. At the time, or concurrently, I was doing some work with Ann Muirwood at Champs, which is now Cheer. Got to know the Mama Bug and the Rose community as well. And we were doing this hospital work in the Deep South, in Mississippi, New Orleans, and then in the Indian Health Service, and the Kellogg Foundation was funding that. And Ann Muirwood asked me, what do you want to do? Like, we're going to apply for this other grant. What do you want to do? Let me know, I'll write it in. And I was like, I want our own training. I want to create our own training, 45-hour course for Native people. And the reason, or why this was important, is because I really saw it as a birthright. Our chiefs, our ancestors, signed treaties with the US government that gave us a right to of self-determination, right? To determine what is important for us as Native people. We have a right to do that. Self-reliance, that we should be able to rely on ourselves, on our community, for our food, for our employment, for our housing. That's a right that our ancestors gave land, signed over land, and that's a whole other conversation about, how unfair that happened. But, the intention with these agreements, these treaties, was that their people would be taken care of for the rest of time. Right? That was the deal that was made for the rest of time. Okay? And then last but not least is sovereignty. As Native people, we're sovereign. When you go onto an Indian reservation, you are not in the United States of America anymore. Right? You are on Indian land, you are on that nation's land. And so we have a right to govern ourselves and do our own thing, and for us that includes when we're not on Indian land, right? Like, we're going to do that wherever we are. So Anne, who again is, I really want to honor Anne and her, I really consider her an ally of writing that grant. We got the funding, and I was able to take the time to do it. In conjunction with that, Linda Smith was doing some work with Rose that brought a group of us in to do a 45-hour kind of train the trainer as well, and that really like spearheaded this work. none of Linda's training, I ended up having to rewrite the entire, curriculum for the Native community, but it still put it in my head that we can do this, that we have a right to do this. And so the Indigenous Lactation Counselor training is truly for us and by us. It is Native designed. It is Native educators, me and Kim, and most importantly is it's Indigenous learners. So we say our training is not a cultural competency training. It is not a training for people to come and learn how to work with Native people. This is about giving Native people back the knowledge that was taken from them and giving it to them so that they can do what they want with their community, in their community, right? And serve people how they see fit. And so that's that. Mm-hmm. So I started writing the curriculum in around 2015 probably, and we'll kind of go through a couple of show some pictures of our cohort, of all of our cohorts, but our first training was in September of 2017, so 5 years ago. All right, so we want to just share a little bit about what is different about our lactation training, because a lot of, and I'm sure a lot of you hear this of like, well, what's so different about Black breasts, or what's so different about Native people, but right, we're all the same. Yes, we are, like clinically, yes, but as we know, breastfeeding is a cultural practice, right, and it's a traditional practice. It's not just a medical body thing. There's so much more that goes into that, and I know you all know that too. So we want to share a little bit about what makes our course different than other trainings and why we feel it works great for Native people.
Okay. So one of the things that we kept as a principle of ours is that when it comes to invitation to communities, Cam and I don't market. We don't put ourselves out there saying, invite us, we need to be there. It's really important that as Native people, we can also do harm too, right? And so we really want to make sure that the community was there to invite us, and they dictate what is important to them. So they may not prioritize breastfeeding as something that they want to work on as a community, but also we want to make sure that we're respecting their boundaries, we're respecting what they see as important to them, and that was really important that we made sure that the communities invite us, and all the communities that have invited us, they were all reached us by Facebook or emails, word of mouth. We've even gotten re-invited by a couple more communities when we first trained in 2017. So that was really something that we really want to focus on, is not market and not impose what they feel that was important to them, but really put that, that respect to them, that we are going to go there only when we're invited to the communities.
Yeah. There's been a lot of harm done to Native communities by uninvited guests.
Yep.
And that includes other Native people. And so that's why we believe in that, and honestly, we've been quite busy that way. I can't even imagine what would happen if we marketed ourselves and had a website. So I'm we're doing 12 trainings in this year. So anyway, all right.
So when we think about, we are Indian time, because we say that a lot more with our participants on our first day, is time is a colonial construct. So we believe that each course is its own living and organic, unique class. We believe that being on ancestral time, that the students will learn what they are meant to learn, rather than us rush through the information or content, but we really want to focus on the quantity of content. Also that when we are learning together, we are also building relationships. We're creating that space to learn, storytell. We were in, which community where we actually built a wigwam? We had a mom.
We were in Bad River, and one of our students was 39 weeks pregnant with her sixth baby. And she was going to be having her baby at home. She was going to be the first one to have, in 100 years, to have her baby on their reservation at home, in a wigwam, which would be their traditional homes, but they were building one specifically for birthing. And she didn't come to class on Thursday, and probably midway through the morning, the organizer tapped us on the shoulder and was like, so Hope's in labor, and her wigwam isn't complete, like, but we have 19, 20 people, right, are there. And so we paused the training and we went and helped her build her wigwam and get it in place so that she could have her baby there, which she was born that next morning, early morning, you know. And so that was an example of why we're on Indian time. And just for folks that aren't around Indians, this is not vastly different from color people time. So just so you know, like, it's not just in case you were wondering, it's not that, it's pretty much the same thing, right? So it was, you know, but it was this thing where, yeah, if we, you know, if we were in the CLC training, for example, right, that would have been a hard no, right? We're not going to pause for 3 hours and go build this chick's wigwam for her, right? We got things to talk about, right? We have 48,000 hormones that you need to all know, right? So that's the kind of thing that we're like, no, you know, because you can't tell us that that was not the most valuable thing we did that week. Right? It was the most valuable thing we did that week, and we've had so many examples of that when we just leave it up to the ancestors, creator, whatever it is, but let go of that construct of time, beautiful things happen.
Just a quick reminder too, a lot of these participants are just relearning their culture too. And so I know half the students that were there, that was the first time they were in a, you know, building a wigwam. We had people and elders telling a story, talking about birth, and while we were constructing the wigwam, they just got a lot more hands-on from that, and a lot more to take, you know, with their day, with the course that they learned, and just, it was really, really amazing to have that.
It was so fun.
Yeah.
It was so awesome. Yeah. All right. Do you want me to talk? Do you want me?
No, I can.
Okay.
So
I'll kind of click through them.
Some of the things that we talk about too, not just about culture and breastfeeding stories, things like that, but a lot of the imageries and artistry that we present in our course really depicts on Native people. So when I took my coursework, and so did Camie, a lot of the images weren't like this. You know, they were
all of them.
Yeah, all of them.
None of them were like this.
So we really spent time on making sure the images represented us, and that it does matter. You know, students can relate to what they see, who's teaching them, and so that was one of the really important parts of the training, is the imagery and the artists that were going to be in our presentations.
Yeah. So this is just a picture of our slide deck. Before that, you saw photos. We don't use any photos of people that are not Native. There's going to be a variety of skin tones and things like that, you know, because Native people are a very diverse group of people. And so, but everyone pictured in the training, and every story that we share, every example is of a Native family. And this is where, you know, I know that several LC, I've heard lots of folks say, like, you know, we're still in the game, and, you know, all of that. And that's a big part of why, you know, we still see families. Like, I'm constantly like taking pictures and being like, oh, can I get a picture of this? Like, I don't have a picture of a Native woman with inverted nipples, so I just have to describe that to people. Right? Like, that's what it is, because I'm not going to use someone else, like a non-Native person's breast in my training. That's just a hard no for us. So we describe it, and as we come up with families and meet families that have certain, you know, oh, I need a tongue tie picture, like, awesome, let me do this. And so it's an important part of us in staying connected to communities, serving families, and clinically that helps keep our skills up too. So yeah. You want me to do this one? Okay. So the other things that we really believe in is barrier-free education. We really see lactation, again, as a cultural practice or a traditional practice. And in the Native community, traditional or cultural practices are they're sacred, right? And so they're not something that you bring money to someone and say, like, here's some money, will you teach me how to drum, right? You would bring a gift, you would bring tobacco, you would bring something, you know, something to them, but it's not, typically not something that we would exchange money for, right? That's not the way we do things, and that's a part of keeping our traditional practices traditional, okay? So for this, some of the things that come up a lot with our training is, or that we get questions about, is just, who can attend. We're not going to talk a lot about our, unless someone asks about it, like the barriers that we've come up against with this training, but we have gotten a lot of pushback, and we have a lot of people that want to attend the training, and so in a lot of tribal communities, the people doing the work are Native, and then their supervisors are not. Yeah. Right? And so there can be a lot of pushback a lot of times from those supervisors because they can't come, right? Like they're not invited to our training. And so they might get kind of pushback of like, well, you need this minimum education, or are you sure you can take it? You're not a nurse, right? You're just a home visitor, things like that. And what we say is, women or femmes have been helping women and femmes breastfeed since the beginning of time. Right? Like we do not need letters after our name to do that. It's something that we've done forever and will continue to do forever. So there's no minimum educational requirement. We have trained everyone from literally like 11, 12-year-olds who come to the training with their moms to medical doctors, right? And everyone in between. And so that's something that's important to us. The other one is that the training is free to participants. We get paid by the community. That's part of being invited to invited, is that the community has said breastfeeding is important to us, and they put their money toward that, right? They say it is, and so that's how we get paid. The students do not pay, and that's also something we feel really strongly about. We believe this is relevant to any role in the community, so it doesn't matter if you are a 12-year-old girl, right, who's there with your mom, or a home visitor, a peer counselor, a medical doctor. We've trained a lot of, I don't even want to say just moms, because we train lots of moms, men, like that, they might just, their purpose is helping their cousins, or whatever, and that's totally valid and so worth our time, right, to do that. Because this is ancestral work, it's long-term work. We're not looking at outcomes in 2 years or 3 years, right? We're talking 7 generations. That's what we want, like that's our thing. And then the other one is that children are welcome. Not babes in arms, children. Kids. Right? Because this is a traditional cultural practice, and we learn that by being immersed in it, right? And traditionally, we would have never excluded our children from these spaces, right? Where moms go, kids go. That's just how it was, right? And that's how they learn that information. And what ends up, and I'm not gonna lie, it's hard. We're decolonizing, right? Like it can be really, we've had some challenging times where we have been outnumbered by kids. There's kids throwing footballs in the back of the classroom. There's, there's just like could be a lot of stuff going on. But the thing is their moms are there every day. From beginning to end. So it's not a barrier for them, right? And so where if they had to, leave or couldn't come because they had their kids at home, then that's a huge missed opportunity. So while it's hard sometimes, overall it's awesome and it's worth it. And those kids listen, right? They hear those lessons, and it's so important.
Also, too, I think. It's funny because Monday comes and we're there and everybody's kind of keeping to themselves, and then by Friday, everybody's an auntie. Auntie, uncle, grandparents, taking care of one another, and that's what our community has always done, is taking care of each other and supporting one another, especially when it comes to learning. The learning environment shouldn't be a barrier to being a parent, so that's one thing we really wanted to make sure that was accessible to the communities we're serving. Yeah.
All right.
So one of the things we also really think it's important is we want to honor the host of where we're invited. So one of the things that Cam and I, we come from really 2 different cultures and tribes, right? We have our own way we pray, our language, but we make sure that we're honoring where we go, and so we're not going to pose our beliefs or our practices in that. So we make sure that the host is honored, and we make sure that they are going to I don't want to say like run the course, but they're going to set the tone for what is needed for that community.
Yeah.
And then always, like when we have opening, it could be shared with a prayer if that's what they want to do, if they want to smudge. You know, every community we've gone to has been different, so we really allow that community to, you know, take charge of that because that's important for them and respecting what they want to do.
Yeah, yeah. We've participated in ceremony at our trainings. We'll do sweat at our training. We had another training where we were talking about formula feeding, which we barely even get to now. Yeah. It's rare that we get to formula feeding and formula prep, but that presentation, when we do it, we talk about water. Mm-hmm. and the importance of water to Native people and the destruction of our waterways in tribal communities. And, you know, because a lot of times we hear in the, it's not really anti-breastfeeding community, in critics of the lactation field, right, is that, you know, formula is fine because, or yes, formula is maybe dangerous for people in Africa, but they don't have clean water, right? Yeah. Tell that to Flint, right? Tell that to the Navajo Indian Reservation. Tell that to any, you know, New Orleans, right? Like we all see it. We do not have clean water, and in Native communities particularly, we are disproportionately affected by that with mining and the destruction of our land. And so we were doing a talk about that as we were getting prepared to talk about formula, and an elder in the training was like, pause, and felt called to do a water ceremony.
Which like an hour.
Yeah, it was a cultural practice, and so
awesome.
We're going to pause and do that, right? And again, the most valuable thing we did that week. Right? Like a really important thing. Yes, we maybe did not talk about certain things, right, because of it, but that's okay, because we're on Indian time, right? Yep. You're going to learn what you need to learn, and it's all good. And then gathering, we do a lot of gathering. It's really rare. I mean, sometimes we just go back to our room and hang and, you know, whatever. But a lot of times we're hanging out with our students. We're going and doing things. We're playing bingo. We're going out to dinner. We're going to the movies.
To dances.
Cultural events, like whatever. We really see ourselves as guests in every community we go to. And so anything we get invited to, we go. Yep. Anything. So that's something that's really also important to us. The other one is no test. No test.
Not have a test.
And this would honestly, it never even crossed my mind that we would do a test, but we get asked that all the time when we get a question on the legitimacy of our training is, do we have a test, right? And the reason why we don't is because standardized tests have never been able to show, or never been a good way to measure what we as Native people know, right? So standardized tests have been shown to produce invalid results when given to Native test takers, and results usually, quote, produce lower or less desirable scores for Native test takers, right? So what we find is by being on Indian time, and spending the time we need to on the topics that are relevant to that community and not the things that are irrelevant, right? Like, it makes much more sense for us in training peer counselors to spend an hour and a half on latch versus doing a session on the 43,000 hormones for milk production when we only need to know 2, oxytocin and prolactin, right? That's it. When do we ever talk about any other hormone with families?
Exactly.
Never. Right? So, but we're going to spend the time on the things that are important and relevant to the community we're serving, and that is how we know they know the information, right? Instead of rushing through it and just trying to get them to answer questions on a test, which isn't even written for them to begin with. Right?
When we do have time, though, we do play Jeopardy.
We do. We play games.
Jeopardy. And it actually has all the content that they learn over the week, and it's very competitive. So,
it's super fun. So that's why we don't do a test. We will never do a test. And again, it just doesn't make sense for our people. Okay. Do you want to Do hands-on?
Yeah, 15 minutes.
15 minutes. But we're last. You guys can stay. No, I'm kidding. We have more time. Okay, we're good.
So,
there we go. Yeah, we're on Indian time. We're the Indians. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so some of the things that we do with our training is hands-on activities. So we spend a lot of time with not only just a latch and position, because that's what really is really important when it comes to breastfeeding, but we have the students do role playing to do like latch positioning, counseling skills. We actually do the beadwork here with the 3 little breasts in the middle. That's something that we do when we are talking about like oral anatomy.
Yeah.
And
so that it comes after Kim does breast anatomy, right? And then we do like infant oral anatomy, which is I always say it's super boring. I mean,
it's a long presentation.
You can only make infant oral anatomy so exciting, right? Like it ends up being okay, but it's like, so we do this craft during that, right, to keep them busy. And so they bead these little breasts, they're little medicine pouches filled with our 4 sacred medicines, so tobacco, sage, sweetgrass, and cedar, that we bring to our communities, and that's what they work on. And these were made last week, and she made like 2 other, they make a ton. A lot of people have never beaded. It's their first time, doing that and kind of reclaiming that art form, and so it's so much fun.
And they retain a lot more information.
Yeah, they're like, oh, I'm gonna do pink Montgomery glands. Like, I'm gonna, like that kind of stuff. Like, they're like, I'm gonna do blue Montgomery glands. How many do we have? Is 10 enough? Right? Like that kind of stuff. Because we talked about all of that, so it's awesome.
Yeah. The other things we do spend time is like hand expression, because that's really important with, me not having the tools or resources, especially in the communities that we have served. But hand expression, we have a lot of our families have experienced, babies in their NICU, and talk about how important colostrum is, how to, use spoons and little, cups to know that this is an alternative way to give their babies milk. Camie's done
I wanted to say something real quick, and then I'll advance the slide before I move off of this picture, because this is these are...
which one is that?
The one of the 2 in our hotel room practicing side lying. So so Kim and I have a funny thing. So this is, I'm like, I know this is being recorded, but I don't think it's going to be like put on YouTube, right? So okay, so I'm going to just say, so Kim and I both took our 45-hour course from Molly Pessel, and it was she's great, but like she was like 75 when I did my training, I think, older white woman. And so a lot of times when things happen in our training, we're always like, what would Molly Pessel do right now, right? Like, what would she do if this happened? And so this was, one of those things. So we were in this little room in a conference room, and we wanted to practice side lying and helping get a baby latched on in a hospital bed, and just this little conference room, because this was a training, we were outnumbered by children. So there were more kids than there were students. And so we were like, well, we could go up to our hotel room, and so we brought all of the students up to our hotel room. This mom is in my bed, right? And she's being, helped and stuff. And so that's one of those things that we're like, would Molly Pessel do this? Right? Like, did she invite a student up to her bed?
No.
So we have a lack of boundaries in the ILC course. Totally. Decolonize boundaries. That's what we got to say about that. All right. All right. So here's the other, we have hand expression.
And you do an oral assessment. So spend some time on tongue tie.
And that's something that I'll say too, like even just with oral assessments, right? So there's a lot of discussion in our communities around scope of practice and who can do what and everything like that, right? One of the things, and I think we have a slide on this in a little bit, addresses that, because we often get asked what's our scope of practice as an ILC or an NDGLC, what can we do? And we always say your community determines your scope, right? At this point in time, anybody can provide lactation support. right? Anybody should be able to do lactation support. And as sovereign people, it is important that we practice our sovereignty and do what we want. So this example of me doing an oral assessment and showing how to check for a tongue tie in a baby, right, is in Barrow, Alaska. This is the most northern town in the United States. It's on the Arctic slope. It's an indigenous village of about 3,000 people. It services 8 other indigenous villages that are only accessible by air. Okay? Yeah. Kim and I are 2 of maybe 20 native IBCLCs in the US and Canada. Okay? Out of 23,000. There's about 20 of us that are native. Okay? So it makes 0 sense to tell a mom in Barrow, Alaska that she needs to see an IBCLC about her baby's tongue tie, right? That a peer counselor can't check her baby's mouth, right? Because that's who she has, right? And up there, all they have is indigenous lactation counselors to address breastfeeding challenges now, right? And so that's something, so we do show how to do it because I want them to have the knowledge, because it will come up, right? And then that mom has to get on a plane, buy an $800 plane ticket and fly to Anchorage, Alaska to get that tongue tie clipped, right? I mean, like, that is their life. So again, like, withholding information from these communities does harm, and it does contribute to our infant mortality rates. And so we want to just give this information to community. And right now, there is nothing legally preventing them from doing these things, okay? Or any of you in this room. But again, that's not a conversation that a lot of, especially IBCLCs, that we like to have. Because we're the gold standard, right, everyone? No. Okay, anyway, okay. So, I just said that. Yep. Never mind. All right. So you should probably just go to okay. Content. Yeah. Do you want to do that?
So some of the things that we do talk about in our content is we definitely spend a lot of time on introduction, knowing who the community we're serving, but also we're just kind of getting to know each other. But a lot of the 2 days that we talk about is historical trauma and unresolved grief. This is something that has been a really important topic among our indigenous communities, but a lot of this is just really something that people really never talk about until we talk about it, right? Yeah. And it usually comes up in breastfeeding. And that's the elders that have come up to had received our training, they talk about their grief, they talk about the things that happen to them in boarding schools, and we spend time, a good chunk of our time in the beginning, about things that impacted us in, you know, like, again, boarding schools, and Camie does a really good job of sharing her story too, and just kind of relating to our communities.
Yeah, so we don't get into clinical lactation until usually end of day 2. Mm-hmm. Our first whole day and into the second day is on historical trauma and unresolved grief. And the reason, I mean, Kim just said why we do that, but one of the other reasons why is that we find that lactation is like 80% counseling, right? And as a therapist, I know, and I learned this when I was in social work school, learning how to be a therapist, is that we have to take care of our own stuff before we can help others. Mm-hmm. Right? Like, we have to process our own thing. So that's why the historical trauma, unresolved grief conversation takes a day and a half or 2 days to do, and why it's important to do it, right? Because our students need to process their own unresolved grief and trauma related to being mothered, or lack of mothering, or breastfeeding, or lack of breastfeeding, or chest feeding, right? Whatever that is, it's important that they process that and begin to heal from that, so that they will be better stewards of the community, right? And be able to help people, because if you're helping people because you need help, you're just going to cause harm, right? Like, we can't do this because we have issues to solve for ourselves, right? That's where harm comes from. And so we want to process that and take the time in our class to go through that and not even let it go, but at least just bring it to the surface, because we know it lives in us, right? Historical trauma is intergenerational trauma. It is trauma that's passed on from generation to generation. And science tells us that that trauma lives on our genes, right? And so we have to heal that. We know it's in us. What we're just doing is connecting it to the brain and bringing it up here. Okay. And then we talk about all this other stuff, and then just a lot of lactation, right? All the same old stuff in lactation that we all do. So we just want to kind of go through some of our pictures of our students. We have pictures of all of our cohorts. So our first training was in Barrow, Alaska in 2017.
Yeah, I just remember this picture because I was mad at Camie.
Yeah, because
I always remember, every time I see the picture, I'm like, I was mad at you.
Because I was, before we left for the training, I was like, Kim, do you want to jump in the Arctic Ocean? And Kim's Navajo, right? So it's Arizona. Like,
we don't do water.
It's hot. It's hot there. So I'm like, we should jump in the Arctic Ocean. And she was like, okay. And then we decided to do it on Friday. So as the week went on, Kim got more and more mad about her decision to do
you
that.
kept bringing it up.
Yeah. And so she was getting, like, by Friday, end of day, she was just like, oh, this bitch. Like, she was so mad at me, and I mean, it was so funny. Yeah. And so we went outside for our picture, and she really, I think it was real at that point.
It didn't start snowing.
That we were going to jump in the ocean, which is, there's no icebergs at this time, but it's slushy. I mean, the water's slushy. It's like almost frozen.
Yeah.
And it's cold.
And we did it.
So, it's cold. Yeah. We did it. We did it. And Kim's like, never again. I know, I should. We have a video of it, and
it's really funny. Never again, though. Never.
All right. So the next year we did 2 trainings. Our second training was in Bemidji, Minnesota. We had 50 students. And that was the one that we were like, it's to this day the biggest training we've ever done. But that was the one I literally, like, every single day cried because I was so overwhelmed by it. But it was really this thing of, like, our community wants this, right? They need it. And that training was a testament to that. And so then we have Bad River, which is in Wisconsin. Our third year, we did 6 trainings. So each year we're just adding more and more on. And so including, we did our first urban training. So we did Seattle, which was something that was, Kim and I had a couple of goals when we started doing this thing. We wanted to do trainings in both of our homelands. We wanted to do trainings in both of our communities, which was the urban areas of Seattle and Phoenix. We want to do Canada, and now we have new goals because we've done all of them, which is awesome. But we also did Hawaii, and that's the bottom right-hand picture. Is we were invited to Hawaii to do a training, and so we trained 40 Indigenous lactation counselors there. 38 of them were Native Hawaiian, or no, 37 were Native Hawaiian, and then 2 were Samoan, and 1 was a Native American woman that lived in Hawaii. And we were on homestead land there. It was amazing. We ate traditional foods the whole week. It was perfect.
A lot of ceremony in the morning.
Perfect. Yeah, we did ceremony there. It was amazing. 2020, 1 training. So we had 9 training, or I think about 6 or 7 trainings scheduled for 2020. We did our February training. We went to day 1 of our March training and canceled it. I mean, literally, like,
the day everything shut down.
COVID like hit on like Friday, and by Monday it was like, and so we went to our first, we went to our March 2020 training, which was right after New Mexico, and canceled it day 1. And so, and other than that, we didn't do any in 2020. This will be for the next picture, I'll kind of explain. So that was 2020. And then summer of 2021, we got back on the road, and we did 8 trainings in 2021. We went, did a lot in Arizona, which was amazing. We got invited back to Alaska. We did one in Minnesota. Here I put Minnesota, which is the Dakota word. So I was like, oh, I'll teach everyone. So Mini is the Dakota word for water. Sota is the Dakota word for smoke. And so Minnesota, it's the river, like the smoke of the rivers is, like where that comes from. So I was like, I'm going to put the Dakota word there. So that was an amazing training, and then you can see we did one virtual training. So we get often asked, do we do our trainings virtually? We did it once. We're never going to do it again. Don't ask.
Don't ask.
Don't ask. It's not going to happen. Barring a monkeypox pandemic and us all being shut down. Yeah, like hopefully this, but we ended up doing one virtual training that was booked, and it was because the pueblos in New Mexico were continued to stay shut down through the end of last year. Yeah. And so they asked us to switch to virtual. We did it. It was hard. There were some really good parts, like napping during lunch. And watching Netflix during lunch. Those things were fun, but otherwise it was the worst.
Yeah.
So we don't plan on doing it, and kind of, again, thinking about Indigenous learners, right? That we learn best by being in person, being in community, doing things hands-on. We are not meant to learn that, or we don't feel that is the best way to learn, and it's certainly not the best way for us to teach. Yeah. So that was part of it too. And then 2022, which we are halfway through our teaching season of 2022. So we had a big project in Michigan, and our friend Angie, who will talk about the Noni project in a minute, brought us to Michigan to do 6 trainings. So that's what we've been really busy doing all this summer. We've been gone almost every other week, and we did a training in Seneca as well. So those are our 2022 trainings.
Seneca's in New York.
In New York, yes. So that's what we've been up to there.
Yeah, these are just some of the quotes from our students. So
we ask, one of the questions is, what was the most beneficial aspect of the course, right? And these were some of the things. These make me teary. Just, it doesn't take much for me to cry, but when I see them, it just makes me so happy, because I always wonder, is there a course that good? Is it really, or is it just I don't even know. And then I read the evals, and I'm literally almost everyone's suggestion for how to make it better is to do it longer. I'm what? How can you it's already 5 days. So yeah, but just, being able to ask questions and not feel embarrassed. I'm sure a lot of us have had that experience, right, of being in a classroom and not, even today, and I'm trying to, this is part of decolonizing thing, during, the first speaker, she said a word that I literally didn't know what it was.
Is it concordance?
Concordance, yeah. I was I don't even know what that word means.
She's I'm Googling
it. I go, I don't know what that word means. I'm going to Google it, right? But if I was in a different environment, I'm going to be silent. I'm not going to say that and let someone know that someone with a master's degree at 41 years of age, doesn't know what an English word means, that kind of thing, right? So we have to think about what is the learning environment. And so when our students feel comfortable asking questions and they don't feel embarrassed asking questions, and we do get asked questions that I'm wow, I didn't expect to get that question, or you didn't, we were always surprised at, and that was actually a lesson learned when we started the training. The very first time we did the training in Alaska, I think I had 32 modules created. It was a lot.
And you thought we were going to get through all of them.
Yeah, right? We got through 14. Because then I'm in my basement, this is going to take 45 minutes, this is going to take, right? And then I learned very quickly what everyone's baseline knowledge was, right? And we had to really go back to the basics and start, which me and my educational space was thinking as an IBCLC, everyone knows this, right? And then it turns out not everyone knows that. Yeah. And so we really have to go back. But I just think that's a really important part of it. And that our, people think our course is in depth, that it's clinically really strong, they feel really prepared. So we're not giving up anything clinically by, also acknowledging people's culture and all of that kind of stuff.
I really like this quote.
Yeah.
It was totally native to be in a room with strong Indigenous women was the most powerful experience of my life. So that speaks to me because I remember this young woman that I'm thinking it's the same young girl, is she's never been in that space to have her own people to support her and let her be herself. And I remember we had a talking circle after that, that last day, and she was crying. She was like maybe 19, 20, and all of her years of high school, college, she felt like this was the only place she can be herself and not have to code switch, you know, her attitude, her way she could ask questions, just not, you know, usually be quiet and just you don't say anything, but she was really just, you know, feeling the moment and really appreciative of that opportunity to learn and be herself. Yep.
When people can be authentic and be themselves, they are better, they're going to take in information, right? They're going to be more open. I love this, you know, one of the most important things I've ever accomplished. I mean, those are things that are just like, it's just so awesome, you know, and that's sort of when we think like, is this good? Is this, you know, like, what are people getting out of it? And then you read stuff like that and you're just like, wow, this is so cool. And we see, it's really fun on social media seeing people like, you know, students' boyfriends like reposting their girl's certificate and being like, I'm so proud of my baby. She did this. She's an Indigenous lactation counselor. Like, call her up. You know, that kind of stuff. Like, it's awesome. Like, families are proud of their students, and
they even have business cards with their little
like
name.
We love it. It's great. Just a couple of other things. You know, this was all around excellent. It felt right at home, even if the information was new to me. I didn't have to hide my identity or catch others up to speed on history. This is why it's Indigenous only. This is what, because I don't have time to catch everyone. You know, I mean, literally, like, it would take a long time if I had people that didn't know certain things, right? Like, if I say Indian boarding schools in this space, some of you might know what I'm talking about, but some of you also might be thinking like a private school in the Nantucket, right? Like, but I say boarding school in a group of Native people, they all know exactly what I mean, right? And so we don't have to spend time on some of that information, so we can go more in depth and work on other things. So just really, really good stuff there. And then kind of one last one that I really love too was the empowerment of our trainers, that we have the knowledge and the leadership to teach this inherent right of breastfeeding. This was exciting and empowering on a spiritual level, right? So really important stuff. Okay. So let's think. Oh, sorry. All right. So let's talk about where we're at or what we've done. I can't really see that. Oh yeah. Sorry, it is tiny on here. All right. Let me. Okay. So to date, we've trained 434 Indigi LCs. Yes. So that's as of our last training that we finished last week. So we got home on Saturday from our final training in Michigan. We call ourselves Indigi LCs, so Indigenous LCs, Indigi LCs, representing 3 countries. So we've trained folks from Canada, from the United States, and we've had 1 Maori person. And so that was awesome. And we have over 50 Indigenous communities represented in our students. So that's urban, tribal, like a variety. I think that's quite a bit more. I was just doing kind of like a rough, like, I have a weird photographic memory, so I could go through the pictures and be like, I remember their tribe, you know, like, remember. So it was a rough kind of estimate, but I think, you know, we're definitely at least 50. There's been a lot of coalition building from our training. So one of the things that, you know, by giving this information back to the community, then they feel empowered, and you saw that from their quotes, they feel empowered to do things with that knowledge, right? And so a lot of our students, or almost all of our students, have created some sort of a coalition or support group or collaborative, something to do something for their community, right? And because they're the ones who dream big for themselves, right? Like, that's something that we always say, like, I can dream pretty big for Native people, but only like a community can really dream big for themselves, right? And we've seen seen that lots of times.
Real quick with Coalition, I think when Camie first started looking for a breastfeeding support or organization, when she started her work, Navajo Nation was the only breastfeeding coalition. I think it was 1989, 90.
When they started?
Yeah.
I don't know when they formed their coalition, but they were the only one. Mine was the second Native coalition in the U.S., and that was formed in 2010. And so it was the Navajo Nation was the only one prior to that. And now there's a dozen, 15, and then there's just, ones that don't necessarily call themselves coalitions. They're collectives,
organizations,
all of that. So it's super awesome. There's been a lot of resolutions and proclamations. Again, as tribes, we're sovereign nations, so we can pass our own laws and resolutions. And so a lot of the communities we've gone to, that's some of the things that the community decides they want to work on, is passing resolutions or laws for their tribe, for worksite lactation, breastfeeding in public, because state law doesn't apply on Indian land, right? So if you're on a reservation, that state's laws don't apply there. So we need to have tribes pass those resolutions. And it's important, as we all know, for leadership, when our government leadership supports something, that means something to the community too, right? So there's that symbolic piece there. And then we've had 3 states that have acknowledged Indigenous Milk Medicine Week, which was the August 8th through the 15th, which we're part of the group that organizes Indigenous Milk Medicine Week. So that's been, some of our students have done that as well. And then last, we wanted to acknowledge the Noonie Project, which our friend Angie is here from Peshawar Town. So we're super happy Angie's here, but Angie took our training in 2019 in Sault Ste. Marie. You're welcome to go and talk to Angie more about her work, but she is a PhD student in medical geography and ended up writing a grant that was nearly 380,000 or 360,000, whatever. It's like
it's a lot of money.
It's a lot of money. Doing a lot of work all over the state of Michigan with Indigenous communities. There's a lot to the Noonie Project, but one of the parts of this project was bringing us back to teach 6 trainings in Michigan and different tribal communities, and so that was one of those things we really wanted to acknowledge that, because it was so special and so extra. And again, that's something that I would have never crossed our mind to do, right? Only the community can dream big for themselves, and they know what they need, right? So yeah, and then just next, we still have a couple trainings this year, so we're going to be going to Arkansas. Turns out when they first called, I was like, there's no Indians in Arkansas, like why are they calling us? But there's a large Marshallese community in Arkansas, and so we've been asked to come there to do a training with the Marshallese community and Native people from Oklahoma, which is their neighbor. So we're going to be there. We're going to be in Montana, and we've been invited back to Paskayaki, which we did in 2020, and they've actually written us in as to their annual budget to have us come back every year.
That's in Tucson, Arizona.
Yep, and we already have 7 courses scheduled for 2023, including Canada, finally. We're going international. And so that is it. So I know time's up. I don't know if that means we have no time for questions too. We do have time for questions. So in Navajo, you would say thank you by saying yep, and in Dakota, thank you is Wopula, which is what I'm used to saying, but thank you all is Genchiakapi. So thank you all for your time, and we're happy to take any questions.